Earth Foreigners Revealed: The Two Ancient Elites That Rule the World, Part 2, by Burke Gumusz, November 15th, 2023.
There can be little coincidence in the observation that Nazi German radio and radar stations were constructed on ancient mark points in the land's sacred geometry. Nigel Pennick.
Those familiar with the contact reports know that the Giza intelligences, or the Ba'ath Black Brotherhood, worked through the secret Nazi Thule Society and later through the SS to achieve their goals of world domination. And that brings us to Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer commander of the Schutzstaffel, Protection Squadron, SS, also called Die Schwarze Sonne, the Black Sun, or Der Schwarze Stein, the Black Stone, who is without a doubt the real-life character of Red Skull from the Marvel comics. In the US action and science fiction comic book adaptation, Captain America, the first Avenger from the year 2011, Red Skull, founder of the fictitious SS secret organization Hydra, depicted as a Nazi agent and protege of Adolf Hitler, tries to summon the power of the gods through the so-called Tesseract to fulfill his plans of world conquest. Heinrich Himmler did exactly the same, but in a slightly different way, through the activation of the world grid system.
Commander of the SS Heinrich Himmler. Depiction of Red Skull from Captain America, the First Avenger.
Heinrich Himmler may justifiably be said to be the most powerful man ever to have attempted the resurrection of Atlantis, and to have attempted to understand and activate the world grid system that was its legacy. This he did by establishing officially, on July 1st, 1935, a department called the Ahnenobedienst, the so-called Ancestral Research Bureau, to research ancient texts and sites and to establish their supposed Aryan patrimony. By 1940, it had been wholly absorbed by Himmler's other notorious creation, the SS, the Ahnenerbe Forschungs- und Lehrgemeinschaft, or Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society, was but the tip of a very large iceberg of all manner of projects involving occult methods and practice within the Third Reich. The German Navy employed a research institute that attempted to locate Allied ships using dowsers, astrologers, pendulum geomancers, naval charts, and a whole host of occult and magical techniques. Allegedly, dowsers using pendulums over maps were employed to successfully locate Benito Mussolini when he was being held prisoner in 1943 after the collapse of his government, according to Wilhelm Wulff, who was involved in these projects, all intellectual, natural, and supernatural sources of power, from modern technology to medieval magic, and from the teachings of Pythagoras to the Faustian pentagram incantation, were to be exploited in the interests of final victory. The Nazi Reich, in other words, was attempting literally to resurrect the ancient magic, the lost science of the gods, in some cases, quite literally by invoking them. Concomitant with this all-encompassing philosophy, all manner of esoteric practice was pursued for its potential military application. Within the Ahnenobedienst alone, there were over 50 separate sections devoted to a wide range of scientific and pseudo-scientific research. There was a Celtic studies group within the Ahnenerbe, a group to study the Teutonic cult center at Externstein near Wewelsburg, which was believed to be the site of the famous world tree, Yggdrasil or Yggdrasil, a group devoted to Icelandic research as the Eddas were sacred to the Teuton myth, a group that was formed around Ernst Scheffer and his Tibet expeditions, a runic studies group, a world ice theory division, an archaeological research group that scoured the earth for evidence of Aryan presence in lands as remote from Germany as the Far East and South America. In addition to this, one does not have to dig very long to see that part of this research also included serious effort to understand the world grid, and if possible to tap into whatever sources of power it represented, from geomancy to torsion.
The grid and Hitler's East Prussia headquarters.
Hitler's East Prussia headquarters, the Wolfschanze at Rastenburg, for example, has always been something of a mystery to military historians unaccustomed to examining the influence of esoteric systems of thought on Nazi practice. Why was it built there, set as it was in the swampy woodlands of Die Görlitz among the Masurian lakes of East Prussia? Why build a headquarter in a wooded swamp? The answer, if one knew about the world grid and the Nazis' obsession with anything that could confer power, was simple. When Hitler's engineers laid out the fortress in 1940-1941, they incorporated a civilian graveyard lying astride a ley line which ran from a high point west of Rastenburg, through a church in the town, the church and chapel at Karlshof near Krausendorf, a suburb of Rastenburg, through the site of the Kurhaus itself, a high point at 137 meters above sea level, on through the graveyard to the island of Tautenberg, and thence to the village of Schwidden. Himmler's headquarters in East Prussia, Hochwald, was situated in another wood 12 miles away to the northeast of the Wolfschanze. It was linked to the Kurhaus by another ley line which ran from Hochwald via the Kurhaus to several high points marked by triangulation markers to the southeast and southwest of the town of Rastenburg itself. In ancient German sanctuaries, Wilhelm Teut had noted the coincidence of triangulation markers in his holy lines, and it was borne in mind by Himmler's men when selecting the site of Hochwald. The occult function of the headquarters is obvious. Placing them in significant positions according to sacred geography enabled their rulers to transmit psychic power over the areas covered by the geomantic grid. Of these two lines, one ran almost due east-west, whilst the other, which linked the two sites, ran towards the northeast in the direction of Moscow. But there may have been something more than just Nazi obsession with geomancy and psychic energies in the placement of the two leaders' headquarters, for it should be noted that the number 137 forms a part of the coefficient of the fine structure constant of physics with a value of 137.359999679. The constant was introduced into quantum mechanical theory by Arnold Sommerfeld in 1916.
The convergence of ley lines near Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters near Rastenburg, East Prussia. Note the placement of the fortress on the east-west line.
Official and unofficial German interest in the occult in general, and geomantic systems in particular, goes back at least to the era of the Holy Roman Empire, when the secret imperial star chamber, the Heilige Wehm or Holy Wehms, initiates and executioners would often meet secretly at night at various sacred geomantic sites. By the time of King Frederick the Great's Prussia, this esoteric interest had become fully fledged. Frederick founded the Afrikanischen Bauherren, or Order of Architects of Africa, centering it at his Constantinople Lodge in Berlin. There, its initiates studied hieroglyphics, the sciences, history and antiquities, and the Manichaean mysteries. This fascination with ancient mysteries, esotericism, and knowledge was accompanied by an interesting claim, for Frederick's Prussian Grand Lodge also asserted its continuity from another ancient society, the World Wise Men. This White Lodge is the same group of hidden masters described by Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society and the German Thule Society, from which many leading Nazis came. The Prussian Freemasons claimed that these world wise men were none other than the Carpocratians, a group of Christ's disciples to whom he communicated a secret science, transmitted afterwards to the Templars, and thence via Scotland to the Swedish Rite Freemasons. They were also traditionally endowed with the mastery of a mysterious power drawn from the earth, Vril. The peculiar connection with the earth grid, however, is manifest in the fact that the Freemasons of Frederick the Great's Prussia claimed this hidden elite had the mastery of the Vril energy drawn from the earth. These ideas of a continuity with an ancient elite and of Vril or earth energy force became cardinal principles of the ideology of the Thule Gesellschaft. The Thule Society, as mentioned before, was one of the secret fraternities that helped to midwife the Nazi Party into existence. The Thule Society believed that by harnessing the Earth electromagnetic swinging waves, which they simply called Vril, or Earth energies, could raise Germany to an unassailable position of world domination. By 1919, the Thule Society, which had been founded in 1912, had become a rallying point for Bavarian mystical anti-Semites. Anton Drexler, original leader of the German Workers' Party, was a member. So was Rudolf Hess, soon to become Hitler's right-hand man, as was Alfred Rosenberg, future philosopher of National Socialism. This society claimed to be the instrument of the legendary secret chiefs of Tibet, descendants of the survivors of Atlantis living somewhere in the remote Himalayas. These hidden masters, the Thule Society, like so many other fraternities that claimed such continuity with an ancient elite, identified with the White Lodge or White Brotherhood, never bothering to consider the other assertion of esoteric tradition, that there was a Black Lodge or Brotherhood or elite as well, and that they might be in continuity with something whose agendas and moral compass were quite different than what was assumed of the White Lodges from which they claimed descent. Note, these so-called secret chiefs of Tibet, which represents most likely the inhabitants of Changshambhala, maybe never considered the other assertion of esoteric tradition that there was also a Black Lodge or Brotherhood, because they are a part of the Black Brotherhood, Giza intelligences, which is obvious when you look at the history of collaboration and influence from Tibetan Lamaism to Nazism. However, it could also be that the inhabitants of Changshambhala are also divided within themselves, like the other Earth, foreigners mentioned in Part 1, between two paths, respectively, two elites.
Interesting to know.
Nicholas Roerich was a mixture of writer, scientist, and artist, but also mystic and guru. Roerich travelled with his wife in the first half of the 20th century through the Himalayas and all of Asia. He not only painted the landscape there with virtually exploding colour splendour, thus he was also influenced by the occultist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and also by other spiritual leaders, and together with his wife Helena he founded the Theosophical Association Agni Yoga. Even today there are Agni Yoga groups and Roerich societies worldwide, as well as various museums. Blavatsky influenced Roerich with her belief in the hidden kingdom of Shambhala. This was a realm that supposedly preserved the teachings of pure Buddhism in secret, while the world had been overrun by barbarians. So Roerich made it his life's work to find the entrance to the hidden valley. He hoped to be able to help Buddhism to victory and to realize a spiritually guided empire, also geographically and politically. In 1923, Roerich came across a statue made of meteorite rock, which was supposed to show the ruler of Shambhala Rigden Japo. He constantly took it with him on his travels, considering it sacred. Roerich even referred to himself in a letter to the Dalai Lama as the coming king of Shambhala. For more information on Changshambhala, Nicholas Roerich, and more, see article origins of unknown flying objects, extraterrestrials, and other visitors.
The statue made of meteorite stone, which is supposed to show the ruler of Changshampala Rigdan Japo. Painting from Nicholas Roerich with the title Command of Rigdan Japo, 1933.
In any case, by asserting their claims to mastery over the Earth grid, the early 20th century German occultists could draw on a wide tradition of English and German Earth grid research. Alfred Watkins had already published his now famous study of the grid system of England, the Old Straight Track, and the famous astronomer, Sir Norman Lockyer, had extended the idea to include astronomical alignments of many ancient sites, including Stonehenge and the Egyptian temples in his books Stonehenge and the Dawn of Astronomy. The Germans Joseph Heinsch and Wilhelm Teut published similar works concerning the grid system in Central and Western Europe and the layout of churches and monasteries over older sacred pagan sites. Studying Stonehenge, Heinsch discovered other alignments overlooked by Lockyer and extended his observations to include all of Central Europe and its ancient sites, that is to say, Germany. In 1933, excavations at the choir in Xanten Cathedral in the Rhineland reveled an ancient geometrical mosaic pavement. Heinsch was called in to examine it. In form, it was a square, crisscrossed with lines and diagonals. Heinsch measured its angle of orientation and found it to be the same as that of the avenue at Stonehenge, a midsummer sunrise alignment. Its form echoed the ancient cosmic diagrams of the Chinese, Mexican, and Norse cosmology. Testing the pattern on a map of the district, he noticed that the lines of this cosmographic mosaic correspondence with the placement of the churches in the district. From this startling discovery, Heinsch was able to detect a major north-south axis on the Lower Rhine, just like those studied in England by Duke, Bennett, and Lockyer. He now had the key to the sacred geography of Europe.
Heinsch's survey of the grid system around Stonehenge. Sir Norman Lockyer's simple triangulation of locations around Stonehenge. Heinsch's grid lines at Stonehenge. Gerlach's system of alignments in Central Europe.
Heinsch's associate Gerlach extended this system into a ley line system covering the whole of Central Europe, that is to say, Germany and southern Scandinavia, based on the placement of churches in the Issyria. All of this work on the Earth grid by Heinsch, Teut, and Gerlach, let it be noted, was being done in Germany in the period immediately prior to and after the Nazi assumption of power, which leads to the logical question: what exactly did the Nazis do with it? One clue lies in the outright esoteric nature of Nazi practice, a practice that can only be qualified as geopolitical geomancy. As the Wehrmacht swept across Europe and smaller nations fell, either to outright occupation or were pressured into alliances with the Third Reich, the SS behind the scenes was quietly collecting all manner of things. Coupled with this activity, the Gestapo infiltrated secret fraternities, from the Freemasons to the Rosicrucians, and prepared lengthy dossiers on all of them, since they claimed to possess certain universal secrets which Himmler felt could be put to better us by the SS. The buildings and temples on sacred sites, sites whose locations were themselves determined by arcane methods, were specifically designed to channel and enhance those earth, energies to the exclusive use of the priesthood that owned then. For to possess these sites was to have control of the psychic body of the whole country. In ancient times, the sacred layout of the country was held to be essential for the well-being of the fields, the flocks, and mankind, so the government of a nation depended upon control over the country's geomancy. Nazi occultists were deeply interested in all obscure manuscripts. They carefully investigated all the ancient archives they plundered in their rampage across Europe in a search for some further knowledge which could aid their creation of the new order. Amongst this welter of half-forgotten occult lore resurrected by the Nazis was the physical control of nations by means of the ancient science of geomancy, which some call earth magic. In ancient times, they found, a nation's most sacred place was also invariably its seat of government. Possession of this sacred place, the psychic center of the nation, meant dominion over it. The whole science of geomancy finally became an essential magical tool in the conquest of Europe. Thus, the lines of force which German grid researchers had uncovered in Central and Western Europe were understood by the Nazis as tools to be used as lines of conquest. Thus, with the SS's infiltration of fraternal societies, it should come as no surprise that there are some slight suggestions that the Nazis saw the connection between sacred sites and a potentially deeper physics. For Nazi German radio and radar stations were constructed on ancient mark points in the land's sacred geography. Indeed, Nazi high-energy research seems to have been in part driven by physics considerations of various points on the Earth grid within the Third Reich. The place where the occult arts and official science came closest together is in the reel of Earth radiomagnetic psychic energies. By the 1930s, luminaries like Nikola Tesla claimed that electronic research was close to perfecting the death ray. German scientists saw this as the ultimate weapon which would guarantee world supremacy. Working with high-voltage X-rays, the Nazi physicist Schiebold attempted to develop a ray that would destroy an aircraft in flight. Codenamed Handbrand, a similar device used intersecting beams of infrared energy to burn up enemy aeroplanes. This line of study allegedly proved fruitless, but one of its spin-offs was the electron microscope, now a fundamental research tool in both biology and materials science. Hitler had said if we had more powerful microscopes, we would discover new worlds, and the electron microscope did just this. It has indeed been one of the few useful legacies of the Third Reich.
Excerpt from Contact Report 779.
That means, which you knew, that NTI's plans for the invention were found and further developed by the Allies at the end of the war, just as the plans were passed on through espionage and their data further developed, from which they came to fruition. If the Nazi researchers who were working on it at the time had been able to complete the invention completely, and before Hitler, together with his wife who had married him shortly before, was shot by his servants in his bunker in Berlin, then he would have become the ruler of the world with this weapon. Only you should know that the plans were secretly copied and passed on as a result of espionage. Consequently, today, 2 states have this weapon, of which not even the highest leadership of these states knows anything, but only the military and possibly the secret services. But if this is really the case, and it seems to be reality, then only certain few people are privy to it, including those who know how to operate this weapon, are unbound by friendship or marriage, and are monitored in such a way that they are killed immediately if they make the slightest noise to other human beings.
In connection with this high-energy research, various mysterious transmitters were erected at several key points in the Reich. In 1938, the Brocken, a celebrated peak in the Harz Mountains, was the site of feverish construction work. Holy mountain of the goddess Freya, the Brocken is best known for the curious optical phenomenon known as the Brocken spectre, which occurs when the shadow of a person on the summit is cast by the rays of the sun onto a cloud below. Under some conditions, this spectre has a saintly halo around its head. This transmitter was a strange contraption, a tower surrounded by an array of posts with pear-shaped knobs on top. At the same time, a similar system was erected on the peak of the Feldberg near Frankfurt. When it began operation, there were soon reports of strange phenomena in the vicinity of the Brocken Tower. Cars travelling along the mountain roads would suddenly have engine failure. A Luftwaffe Air Force sentry would soon spot the stranded car and tell the puzzled motorist that it was no use trying to get the car started at present. After a while, the sentry would tell the driver that the engine would work again now, and the car would then start up and drive away. Years later, after the war, the car paralysis phenomenon was reported time and again in association with UFO sightings. Whatever its function, this transmitter was emanating a field of energy sufficient to short-circuit the electrical systems of nearby cars.
The Brocken Tower, Harz Mountains.
A characteristic feature is the dense fog that shrouds the peak at Brocken 300 days a year. Strong temperature fluctuations and rapid weather changes are also typical. Wind speed of up to 260 kilometers per hour are not uncommon, as hurricanes sweep over the mountain around 100 days a year.
The Feldberg Tower, near Frankfurt today. The original building from 1939 was a monolith-like vertical block.
An event during the war demonstrated that these transmitters were being used in some sort of weaponized capacity. On January 24, 1945, two American P-38 twin-engine fighters were dispatched to investigate the reports of a Nazi magnetic wave weapon near Frankfurt. The P-38 of Light. HIT suddenly began to experience malfunctioning of all its electrical equipment as he drew close to the transmitter's installation near the Feldberg at Frankfurt, including his compass, which began to spin rough 360 degrees, and his plane's two engines, which began to sputter and run very rough. The other pilot, flying nearly a mile away from Lüttich. HIT experienced no such difficulties. Upon their return to base landward, HIT's difficulties generated an intelligence report entitled Preliminary Report on Suspected Magnetic Ray. A British engineer did calculations to determine how large such a facility had to be, and he concluded that it would have been a facility using such large ground-based coils as to render the idea impractical. The German transmitters, however, as we have seen, involved no such coils, but were rather a series of antennae laid out in circular fashion, almost mimicking the henge-like stone structures that dotted the European and British landscapes with peach-shaped bulbs at their end. As I have observed elsewhere, this implies that the German device operated on different principles than what the Allies expected, given that the description of these antennae does not resemble that of a huge set of coils. But if there were different principles involved, what were they? One clue is perhaps afforded by the post-war conclusions of yet another German electrical engineer, Professor Dr. Konstantin Mail, who noticed not only that certain ancient Greek and Roman temples were built according to the principles of sacred geometry, but also that they could, if viewed with the eye of an engineer, function as vast waveguide cavities for simple radiotelegraphy. Ancient temples, in other words, were deliberately constructed as simple radio transmitters. The placement of such temples and the Nazi transmitters on world grid sites suggests that the Nazis did indeed discover or rediscover some aspects of long-lost science. In this connection, it should also be noted that they showed immense interest in Nikola Tesla's schemes for the wireless broadcasting of electrical power. The Spanish conquerors of Peru noticed the same straight-line system in the far-flung Inca Empire, this time as a network of roads reserved for the Inca emperor and his messengers. But nor were the Spanish the earliest to notice the system. The Romans ran into the same system of straight-line roads as their empire expanded into Gaul and Britain, over the ancient system of ley lines in those countries, and soon paved these roads for Roman armies and commerce. There is abundant evidence that the Romans, or at least someone in the Roman Republic, was well aware of the significance of ancient sites and how to build temples that essentially functioned as simple radio transmitters.
This crucial point of finding the center of a region.
At the locus of divine law, the cosmic pole is the most powerful symbol of authority and is regarded as the only legitimate source of human laws. Its many images include the scepter, the measuring rod, the king post, and the central pillar. Kings and chiefs are installed upon the local world center rock, which empowers their rule, and when the rightful lawgiver pronounces from it, his words have the same unchallengeable force as if the rock itself had spoken. Thus, it became a consuming compulsion for ancient societies and kingdoms to determine the center of their nation, the first component of this exercise being to find or determine the main north-south axis of a given region or country. It was a symbol, an image, of the universal axis of the world. It was this principle of geomantic power as the basis of political power that lay behind the selection of Hitler's East Prussia headquarters. The next step was to determine the regional equator, the main east-west axis. The principle is not entirely unknown to modern cartography, for here are specialists known as cartographers, whose business it is to locate centers. In the United States, these specialists used what can be called a center of gravity approach. They pasted a map of America on a board, cut out the relevant area, and found its point of balance on a vertical pivot. When this was done, the center of the lower 48 states was found to be near Lebanon, Kansas. When Alaska and Hawaii were later added to the Union, the same method located the new center 11 miles west of Castle Rock in Butte County, South Dakota, a short way north of the small town of Spearfish in the northern Black Hills. The center of gravity approach to a given surface and site location are hinting at a deeper physics to such locations, a physics having to do with gravity and the very nature of space-time itself, a view also reinforced by the astronomical alignments of many of these sites. A great scientific instrument lies sprawled over the entire surface of the globe. At some period, thousands of years ago, almost every corner of the world was visited by people respectively elites with a particular task to accomplish. With the help of some remarkable power by sound vibrations, etc., by which they could cut and raise enormous blocks of stone, these men created vast astronomical instruments, circles of erect pillars, pyramids, underground tunnels, cyclopean stone platforms, all linked together by a network of tracks and alignments whose course from horizon to horizon was marked by stones, mounds, and earthworks.
Guest author Burke Gummis.